Hi everyone, my name's Kaz. Today I'm going to be escaping my book bubble and trying historical romance. If you guys saw my previous video, I talk all about what my book bubble is, what my comfort zone is. Spoiler alert, mostly fantasy. I'll leave that video linked in the cards and in the description below so you can get the full explanation of why I'm doing this and what I hope to achieve with it. The TLDW version is that I want to try new genres and see if I'm missing out. So I'm going to try historical romance. A few months ago, I took to Twitter and asked for people who frequently read romance to give me some recommendations on books and authors that they love. So from all of the recs, I've selected 5 books that I'm going to be reading, testing out, seeing if I love it. And I understand that these might not necessarily be the best books to pick from the genre to give me a rounded taste of what I can find within historical romance, at least not in some people's opinions, but these were high recommendations from various people. So these are the 5 books I've chosen. We have The Duchess War by Courtney Milan, Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare, Gentle Rogue by Joanna Lindsay, Because of Miss Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, and lastly, The Day of the Duchess by Sarah McLean. I'll check back in with you on each of the books, let you know how I go, and then I'll talk about whether or not historical romance was a success for me and if I might continue reading more books from that genre. I finished reading Romancing the Duke. The Duchess War. Not Romancing the Duke, The Duchess War. And I really enjoyed it. I'm very pleased that the first historical romance that I read ended up being a good one. I just had so much fun reading it. And I think I am a fan of the trope where 2 people bump into each other, usually interesting or awkward circumstances, and then they part and presume that they'll probably never see each other again. And then very shortly after, they are introduced in a more formal setting and it's like, oh, okay then. So you're this person, or you're related to this person, or you are an important person. I liked the smutty scenes, though I definitely could have had more of it. Wouldn't have objected. I was crying on the bus when I was reading this. Like, it got me really, really emotional. Like, I was really invested in these characters and I really wanted them to both be happy and happy together. The only real issues I had with it were I felt like, especially the first major complication, which I expected to really throw a spanner in the works and cause a lot more long-term tension. Things were resolved really quickly and without much communication between the 2 characters. I guess when it came to that complication, I was just expecting to see a bit more. And when it was resolved really quickly, it just didn't feel like the stakes were very high, especially since, like, I feel like some of the things that these characters did to each other were like really hurtful. One thing that kind of got me thinking about as well, not just about like historical romance specifically, but dipping into other genres. Like, I read a lot of fantasy, whether that's YA, adult, sci-fi, things like that. Like, I read a lot of speculative fiction. And obviously I am familiar with the kind of characteristics of the genre. It's not like I'm actively doing it, like it's a subconscious thing, but I don't want to restrict myself by coming in with certain expectations and then feeling disappointed or not liking it as much because of those expectations and if they weren't met in the way that I wanted them to be. Obviously, the more that I read particular genres, I will become more familiar with the elements that are really characteristic of that genre, and I'll understand how books within that genre work more. But until that I get to that point, I don't want to prevent myself from liking it because of something that has nothing to do with that genre. Do you get what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to say that fast resolution of this complication is like typical of historical romance, because I honestly don't know. I haven't read enough of it yet. So yeah, that kind of started that train of thought. Like, in this instance, with the way that the complication was resolved, I still wish it had been done differently, or at least prolonged a little bit. But yeah, just some food for thought for, I don't know, the rest of this video, but also the rest of the videos in the series as well. Book 1 done. Really enjoyed it. Had a great time. I have also started reading another book. We have Romancing the Duke. Is that what is it called? What did I call it? Fuck. Did I say the book title right? I can't remember what I said. And then I also can't remember. It's hard when I'm reading ebooks and I don't have the front cover there to remind me exactly what the title is every time I look at the book. Give me a second. That was The Duchess War. I started reading Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. I am 42% of the way in and I'm not loving it. The premise I like. So in this instance, we have a duke who kind of had disappeared off the face of the earth for months, and a lot of people thought he was dead. And turns out that his solicitors had sold his castle because they thought he was dead to some other guy. And this guy passes away, and in his will he leaves the castle to our main character. What's her name? Something Goodnight. Izzy Goodnight. So it's a little bit awkward when Izzy turns up to this castle and is told, here, you've inherited this property, and there's a duke there who's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And Izzy's kind of just like, well, you're just gonna have to deal with me because I'm staying, I'm making this my home. So that's kind of the idea of the story, how our characters meet. And I don't connect to the characters individually, and I especially don't connect to the relationship that's forming. I don't see any chemistry. I don't believe it. Izzy is interesting enough. And then in terms of the romantic interest, the Duke, I think he's supposed to be given off this like stoic, closed off, strong dude vibes, and he's got this kind of rough past and he's closing himself off to the world so he doesn't form a connection with anybody. But I'm just getting dickhead. I'm not hating it, I'm not disliking it enough to DNF. If there's anything major that I just like a red flag for me, then I might put it down. But I am going to finish reading this and see if I do form a connection to the characters. But I don't understand the attraction between the two. I don't see it. I don't see the chemistry. And I've heard good things about Tessa Dare. Like, it's a name that I am familiar with, even though I haven't read any of her books before. So I'm curious if it's a case of like, this is just not the book for me, but there's other books of hers that I enjoy, or if I don't quite click with her writing and her characterization. I mean, I guess I'll find out. I don't have any other Tessa Dare books on this list to read, so if there are any other of her books that you'd recommend, especially over Romancing the Duke, then please let me know. I'm curious. I have finished Romancing the Duke, and I don't know how I feel about it. I'm kind of mixed. I don't know, just the chemistry for me was the main thing. Like, the fact that this is a romance novel, and if I don't believe the chemistry, or if I don't see any, then it's really hard for me to kind of root for the characters and the romance between them. I just couldn't get behind it. I will say though that the kind of subplot was quite interesting. Kind of Izzy's whole story with her father being an author, that was quite interesting. I did enjoy that, but didn't care for the characters, didn't care if they ended up happily ever after, so therefore why? I mean, like, Izzy was fine enough. Like, I didn't have any major issues with her, but Ransom, I couldn't see the appeal. I just couldn't excuse the way that he behaved, particularly at the start. Like, it just, nah. Yeah, unfortunately, Romancing the Duke wasn't for me. That's okay. We've got other books. So I was originally going to be reading It Happened One Autumn. I may still read it if I have time to. However, I was talking to one of my friends at work, and she was appalled that I did not have a Joanna Lindsay novel on my list. So she made me buy Gentle Rogue, and I picked this one up pretty quickly because I was very intrigued by the pirate element. Now, there's no like piracy within the book. James Mallory used to be a pirate. He's retired, and even though we don't see any pirating happening, that aspect of his past does affect the story. So that was kind of the main thing that drew me to this one and why I picked it up quickly, and I flew through this. I didn't want to put it down. I really enjoyed it. So we have Georgina, or Georgie, who travels to England to find her fiance. A guy named Malcolm proposes to her just before he goes off to fight in a war. She's American. Malcolm is English but moved to America, and while fighting, he gets taken by the English again, and he's like been gone for 6 years and hasn't returned after the war has ended. So Georgina's like, what's going on? Why hasn't he come home? We need to find him. So she travels to England. Bit of a rude awakening when she finds him. Now, because Georgina is determined to leave as soon as possible, in order to get back on the first boat possible, Georgina and her escort have to work on the ship, and being a woman, she cannot. So she pretends to be a boy and ends up being the captain's cabin boy. And it was so good. I really, really enjoyed this one. This one, yes, the chemistry, the tension, I saw it, it was there. There were some pretty humorous moments as well. I was just really there for the drama. Like, things are really dramatic. There's a lot of major conflicts between different characters and the families. I loved that, and it was just really good. There were definitely some moments where I was like, James, your dickheadishness is really rearing its head here and now. You know, things worked out in the end. It was all fine. I really enjoyed it. I don't know what else to say. It was just a great ride. Didn't want to put it down, so I just kept reading. Next up we have Because of Miss Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. So this one I've read about 85 pages of so far, and I am enjoying what I'm reading so far, which is great. So we have Billy Bridgerton and George Rokesby. The two of their families are quite close. I believe that they live on like neighboring properties. So the Bridgerton kids and the Rokesby kids kind of grew up together. Now, I really enjoy hate to love romances, and that's kind of what we're getting with this one. It's not a case of like the two are mortal enemies or anything, but growing up together, Billy and George never really like enjoyed each other's company. The two of them seem to get on each other's nerves and can't seem to stand each other for a very long time. But the book begins with Billy on a roof. She's injured her ankle. So she climbed a tree trying to rescue a cat. Things went a bit wrong. She fell and sprained her ankle. And the first person to come within hearing distance is George. From what we've seen so far of Billy and George, like, there is a bit of like snide comments and like jabbing at each other as they're having conversations. But at the same time, the two of them both seem to show that underneath that, they do kind of care for each other. Like, they're family friends. They've spent a lot of their lives growing up together. So they've been in each other's lives for a long time. And even if they don't necessarily get along, they still seem to care for each other. And obviously it's going to progress into something more, and I'm very excited about it. So far, I'm really liking Billy as a character. She's quite sassy at times, obviously very much so when she's around George, but she's also really intelligent and resourceful as well, and seems to kind of break the boundaries and expectations of women as well, which I'm enjoying seeing. He's kind of struggling a little bit with the life path that's been set for him as the eldest brother, but already we've seen some tenderness from him, and I really like seeing Billy through his eyes, and I'm just really excited to see how the rest of their story will go. I have a bit of time this afternoon to do some reading, so I'm going to try and make a good chunk of progress on this. I would very much like to get to the part where things are starting to heat up between the two of them, so I'm excited. Let's see how this goes. We have finished Because of Miss Bridgerton. So I ended up staying up until 3 AM to finish this one. It was kind of slow going in the middle there. I made a fair bit of progress at the very start, and then I was kind of slowly chipping away at it. But last night I smashed through the last half. This is a little bit different to the other ones that I've been reading so far, in that it's so much more of a slow burn. I think I prefer getting more of the smut earlier on, but I feel like with this story and the relationship, it worked quite well because we have these two characters throughout their entire childhood. They really kind of disliked each other, so it made sense to have a really slow shift from that to seeing the other person in a new light and coming to terms with these strange new feelings that seem to contradict how they viewed that person for like 20 odd years. But it was really enjoyable. I did have a bit of an iffy moment the first time the characters kiss. Didn't like how that played out. However, it wasn't played off as if that was a healthy thing. Billy kind of calls George out on the fact that he was behaving the way he was behaving. So I was glad that that happened. As it was all happening, I was like, ew, this is gross. This is really unpleasant. I don't like this. In the text, George's demeanor was described as predatory and getting all those vibes. So I was like, ooh, don't like how this is happening. Not for it. But it does turn around. Thank goodness. And then it was smooth sailing from there. So really enjoyed it. I am now about to embark on my next journey. We're going to be picking up The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. Something happened between the Duke and the Duchess of Haven. The Duchess disappears. She runs away. After almost 3 years, the Duchess suddenly returns and demands a divorce. She wants to sever that marriage and finally find the happiness that was taken from her when her husband broke her heart. The Duchess can have her freedom after she has found a replacement wife, I believe. So this requires the two of them to spend the summer in close quarters. and I'm assuming things blossom again. So it's kind of like a second chance romance, overcoming whatever major hurdles seemed to have happened in the past. So very interested to see what I think of this one.
One eternity later.
I had a bit of a mishap with this book. I started reading it. I didn't get very far, maybe 30 or 40 pages into it, and then I left it at a bus stop. I was a little bit mad at myself, just a little bit. I did end up ordering myself a second copy and eventually started reading again. I have now finished this book. First of all, let's talk about this second chance trope. And I'm not sure how I feel about the trope itself. As with any trope, it probably has to be circumstantial, but it's one that I haven't really encountered much before. I think from memory, the only other time I've come across this is with Illuminae. The two main characters at the very start have just broken up, and then space chase. And I really enjoyed it in that one. In this one, I didn't dislike it or anything, but it was an interesting situation because the things that both characters did to each other were pretty drastic, I feel. There's a lot of tension because of it, and they both really hurt each other's feelings. Like, they kind of broke each other's hearts. So it was definitely interesting seeing the two come back together. I think I probably would have believed it more if it was maybe written a little bit differently. For example, there is a sexy scene, and I feel like the intention with it was that, you know, when there's two characters who are just like screaming at each other with so much hatred, and all of a sudden they just stop and then they start making out. There was so much sexual tension and you were just waiting for it to release, and then it's great, they start making out. I feel like that was the intention with a particular scene in this one, but it didn't come across that way. It just seemed like a really sudden shift and I didn't understand. I wish there was just a little more sexual tension underlying every interaction leading up to this one. Like, there was hints of it, but it wasn't as dramatic as I was wanting it. Like, I really wanted the tension. I'm like on the fence with how I actually feel about the two main characters, Mal and Sarah. Also, when Malcolm was first referred to as Mal, I was just like, Mal! Dislike! Dislike! A little bit traumatized. But besides those two, all of the supporting characters I really enjoyed. Like, I loved all of the sisters, and the interactions between all of them were just wonderful. And Sophie, I want to read her story. Like, I need to read Sophie's story. She was a firecracker. Like, she's the youngest sister, and to outsiders, she seems like the quiet one. She's the first one to like call out Sarah and put her in her place. And I loved it. And then the information that we get and like the very short scene that we see of her and her husband, like, I think I'll really love her story. And then the other women that Haven invites over to like find a new wife, there were some hilarious scenes with those characters. Was it Felicity? Yes, Felicity. Felicity was wonderful. I kind of wanted to see more of her, like, also really intrigued by her. And then also, who else did I love? I loved Calhoun, the American. Overall, like, the cast of characters was just perfect. There were some really enjoyable scenes, really enjoyable interactions. Overall, I did enjoy it. I just wanted a little bit more from it in some aspects, and it got me really excited about Sophie's story and her romance. So definitely gonna look into that. So, I've read 5 historical romances. What is the verdict? My enjoyment of these books were the majority positive. Obviously a slightly bit of a mixed bag, especially with Romancing the Duke, which I just really didn't enjoy. And then The Day of the Duchess, I kind of just wanted a little bit more from, but I did still enjoy it. Because of Miss Bridgerton, the Duchess War, and especially Gentle Rogue, I really loved Gentle Rogue. Absolute successes. So I think historical romance was a win. Like, there were definitely some things that I expected about the genre. Obviously it is going to reflect the time that it's set in. It's going to show a lot of the cultural norms, expectations. I'm speaking mostly about, you know, the treatment of women and how they couldn't really own property and businesses. Anything they owned was essentially their husband's property, but then also the way they're treated in social situations and the ways that they're expected to behave, stuff like that, which I totally expect, and I don't take issue with them being in historical romance. It's just something that, like, on a deep internal level, irritates me to see. Deep down, I'm just kind of like, it hurts to see this, especially since there's still a long way to go in some ways. So that's obviously just like a personal reaction to the way that society was back in those days. But I think going into this, the one thing that I was a little bit cautious of was like seeing too much of like the dominating male. I don't take an issue with
the alpha male trope, but obviously having books set within a particular time period where there is a specific dynamic between men and women, I was wondering how much I would see of that dominating behavior or thought processes. And I feel like with most of these, there's like a sentence here or there. Unlike another book that I tried reading, it was Shana, the romantic interest rapes the main character within the first few chapters. That is too far. No, I'm not a fan of that. And like the fact that it has to be the romantic interest, I'm not going to be able to forget it. It's not going to be sexy from here on out. Luckily, nothing like that with any of these. Out of the 5, we probably get the most alpha maleness from Gentle Rogue in that situation. Did not mind it one bit. Sometimes it felt like it went a little bit far, but the whole book itself was just super dramatic, so it made sense with the story, if you know what I mean. And then also Ransom in Romancing the Duke. There wasn't like one specific thing that he did that I was like, well, there. It was his whole character in general, his attitude, his behavior, the things that he said. He was just a really rude guy. Didn't like him. Just saying. Oh, actually, okay, one thought that I had that was like, I can't remember which book it was from, but there was a comment about how the male romantic interest was just super muscular. In most of these, they're like dukes, and there's never talk about like any of the physical activity they do. So I'm like, how do they stay so incredibly muscular when they don't seem to do anything? There's no evidence in the book, there's no talk about the things, the physical sports or activities that they do on a regular basis to mean that they're so muscular. So I think overall this was a success. And you know what, it's a nice change to stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning reading a book, because usually I fall asleep within 10 minutes. I also like the fact that reading some of these got me really excited to read other books within the series and seeing some of like the sibling romances, like I mentioned with The Day of the Duchess, seeing Sarah's youngest sister Sophie. Really want to read that romance. And then Gentle Rogue kind of got me excited just about the whole series, especially since I then talked to another friend who had read all of those books and she loved all of them. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to invest in all of them. I just had such a good time with it. Couldn't stop reading it. Like, it was great. I think that about wraps up this video. In terms of the next genre that I'm going to try in the next video in this series, I'm leaning towards thriller. So if you have any recommendations, any thriller books or authors you would recommend, please leave those as a reply to my pinned comment down below. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there are any other historical romances that you'd recommend I read, please also leave those in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you very soon in a new video, but until then, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye!